So you don't know what the economy would have done in that time period without that taxation, right? So you're taking a variable and just being like, it's magic money, right? Like, no, the money comes from taxes,
Where did I
right?
say
Which
magic
is
money?
money
Where did
taken
I say
out
magic
of the
money?
economy.
No, 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 no. You just made that up and pulled it out of your ass. Where did I say
No,
magic money?
Topic 1. American rural hospitals are in crisis. Over the past decade, they've been closing at an alarming rate, leaving residents without medical care at a reasonable distance. In Mississippi, one of the poorest states in the union, within one of its poorest counties, a rural hospital is struggling to stay open. Management has said that it's unlikely that the hospital will make it past 2023 unless a massive change occurs. How would you tackle this issue? Should hospitals be subject to profitability pressures? Should the state do direct cash injections to keep such crucial institutions afloat? Or should hospitals close if they aren't nimble enough to adjust to tough times? Yeah, I mean, if you're within these political spaces, you've probably heard this before. Rural hospitals are in crisis. They are disappearing. And like even in this particular article I was looking at, they were talking about hospitals that actually did close, did shut down, right? So it's leaving just a very few ones in an area. When they go, right, people have to travel long distances to get care, and as you know, sometimes like time is of the essence, and so that distance equals lives lost. So yeah, I'm curious what you all think about this. We'll start with Lactoid.
Yeah. So hospitals, just like any other consumer good facility or establishment, should be subject to profitability pressures. We're looking here, it seems as though this hospital in particular did make a couple of poor financial decisions. The article said it's right now currently paying $100,000 a month on a Medicare loan. And the estimates are that it will need $5 to $10 million to stay open until next summer, when the problem will start all over again. Although I honestly don't even know how this math works out, given that the hospital lost $2 million last month. For somehow it's predicting it's not going to keep losing that much money. I don't really know how, but I guess they're optimistic. Several private banks have offered to step in and help keep the hospital afloat. But another issue is that the hospital needs to wait for city and county officials to assist in obtaining those resources. I don't know why. I don't know if they're having difficulty with that. The articles did make it seem so. But regardless of that specific hospital, I think on the broader point, you're not entitled to the labor of other people. And if the staff of a hospital demand a particular wage to do the work that they do, then that sucks for the hospital. That's what they need to be paid. We understand this when it comes to the demand of the worker. The hospital is then obligated to collect that money from those who are serviced and who should either pay for their services just like any other good or service or work off their debt. And other examples include food. Food is a necessity, but people should still pay for their food. Same with medical care. Simply having a want or a want strong enough that that person may consider it a need does not mean you are entitled to the people's bodies or their labor. If the hospital can't survive the market, it should close. And I think if it did close, you would see an opportunity there for something better.
Okay, interesting. It's already going to be a fight. Like I'm loving it. I can feel it already. So, thank you, Scott. Please.
I'm so glad that I've been here to yellow pill lactoid even more. Because that is
Stop pacing on him,
yes to
please.
everything. Yes to everything you just said. I would like to add a couple of more things. Um, one of the big reasons why is it this occurring, right? Well, this is occurring because the community has been hollowed out in terms of the job market. Manufacturing has left this area. And so it is the people that live there responsibility to either move to where the jobs are or to create some other form of economic incentive for there to be the money to support a hospital. The other thing that I want to point out is Mississippi is one of the states that still has con boards, certificate of need boards. One of the major reasons why hospitals have such difficulty being profitable in America are these specific boards. If you want to build a new hospital, let's say a doctor, a psychiatrist, like a general practitioner, a psychiatrist, a couple of ER nurses, and a few people want to get together and kind of like create a small patient care facility that can service minor needs for the community to reduce burdens and to be profitable. Well, they have to not only get permission from Mississippi, but actually they have to file thousands of pages of paperwork, then announce to the community that they're going to do this. Then they have to wait months so that they can have a board. And then that board allows the community to come in and voice their opinions. And then the board is going to vote on whether or not this is allowable. And then hundreds of pages of documents and rules and regulations will go through different payment processes, different things that you have to do, different construction techniques that you have to use. And you have to justify the need for your little thing for you so that you can ultimately be told you can't start this profitable business because a hospital already. This is the fucking problem, is that government comes in, puts massive amounts of bureaucracy and red tape on these institutions, makes it overly expensive, and then destroys the community's access to a hospital. And then they go, see, we caused this problem. Don't we just need more socialism? Don't we just need to steal wealth from other people and destroy the American economy so that we can prop up this system that we fucked up in the first place? And so the right answer is just like the very end of the article said, bitch, move to Baltimore where you have family and Johns Hopkins is, and get rid of certificate of need boards, period.
Oh, okay. Aiko, please.
Okay, just to that point though, I have talked to doctors about I don't know these doctors in particular, but my doctor told me about a doctor friend of his that doesn't accept any insurance whatsoever, and that allows his clinic to charge much lower rates for the services that he does provide. So if people who are uninsured like go to him, they can actually pay reasonable rates for a lot of the services that they create. I don't know how it's worked because I haven't talked to that doctor since the establishment of that clinic, but it was an interesting idea, and I think that might specifically be an idea that you could use in rural areas, particularly because there are several things that we know about rural areas. One is we know that that older people are involved disproportionately in rural areas. So you have a lot more retirees. Maybe it's a dying town, and the people that have remained are older, and the younger people have moved out. There are a lot of explanations as to why that might be. But there's something else too that we know. So I don't know about this particular hospital that you talked about in your article because it was in Louisiana, and Louisiana expanded Medicaid in 2016, which is about 5 years later than the first states that did. However, I have read studies that show that that Medicaid expansion states rural hospitals are dying out everywhere, but in Medicaid expansion states, they're dying out more slowly than in the other ones. And so maybe we need to look at why that is, what it is about increasing insurance availability to the populations of rural areas where there aren't massive populations. So everyone that you add can make a difference in terms of being able to create enough revenue to support a hospital. I don't know. Also, maybe there's an inherent advantage to having a population density that can support hospitals, and maybe some sort of revenue sharing system would be in order, especially within networks of hospitals that sort of share the same financials.
Do you say the hospital in the article was in Mississippi, or are you referring to a different hospital?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, for some reason I thought it was Louisiana. No, Mississippi still hasn't expanded Medicaid, so that makes more sense then.
Yeah. Next, Spartacus, please.
So yeah, I think that hospitals should be given money by the government to be in certain areas, because there's just that profit margin you're not gonna be able to meet if you have a hospital in a really rural area where you're gonna have a lot less people come to visit the hospital. And so the government should have a scaling, basically a scaling flow of money, to where if you're going to go out to these like really rural areas, we're going to give you guys this much money per year to work with, because we know that you guys are getting the patients that these other hospitals are. We know it's going to be tougher for you to be able to be capitalistic in this market. We understand that, but there's also this need for people to be able to see medical care when they need to see medical care. So the government should be in charge of it. They should be in charge of that and should push companies to put hospitals out in rural areas to know for the company to know it'd still be beneficial, they would still profit off it, and that they wouldn't need to garner the amount of customers they currently would have to without this idea.
Roy Campbell.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and keep it short because I think the fight will be a little bit later on. But I think this is where like maybe the United States can take a page out of Canada's playbook, not hockey playbook, but maybe healthcare playbook. Of like as I think I mentioned on a previous panel, hospitals in Canada, at least in my experience, like basically they don't close. This is not to say the healthcare in Canada is perfect, but they don't close as far as I can tell. And I would say hospitals are not or healthcare in general, not a consumer good, a public good, or if you want to specify it in hospitals, I would also use the same identifier. Hospitals should not be subject to profitability pressures, where, yes, again, taking a page out of Canada's playbook, the federal government explicitly transfers healthcare money to the provinces. As in like me in Quebec, Quebec gets money from the federal government specifically for healthcare purposes. And so I'm not opposed to direct cash injections. And lastly, there's actually one thing that Lactoid said that I do agree with, where I think he said something along the lines of like, if the hospital closed, then you'll see an opportunity to open up. But I think he's sort of leaving out something. I would agree. If the hospital does close, like once the bodies start piling up, then yes, I think you'll see an opportunity open up for something to come in. And I'll keep it there for now.
Let's go to Stappy, please.
So here where I live, it's a well-established city, 68,000 people. But one of the problems we had, the city I grew up, the one horse hick town that I came from, we had a regional hospital problem. One of the things we did is we opened up Flight for Life, and that was done with funding from the state of Colorado. And Flight for Life has actually helped us quite a bit. We not only can get people to the next city over, but we can also get them to Denver very quickly. In fact, our Flight for Life has actually brought several women from Texas already during bans and people being confused about what to do if they're suffering a miscarriage.
Is that a helicopter service or something? Like, I don't know
Yes,
what
Flight for Life. Yeah, it's a fully outfitted helicopter filled with everything, and it is expensive. But the thing is, that was one of the investments to the point where we can still, thanks to federal funding of these hospitals and Flight for Life, we can still save people's lives because it is a public interest to keep people healthy. It is a public interest to make sure that they have access to healthcare and that we aren't dealing with, people who are showing up with things we saw in the 1890s. Somebody should not have a car accident and then later find out their leg is gangrenous because they have a brake that is slowly leaking and they're trying to, wrap it themselves or something. We don't want to do things like that. So what we did is we use Flight for Life to help us out. Flight for Life has helped us get women from Texas now, even with some of the bans and the confusion surrounding that, so that we can save their fertility and their lives if they're suffering a miscarriage and any kind of medical help could be seen as an abortion and get people thrown in jail. So they're sending them here. It's helping us keep these hospitals open. And I do think that we need to keep the hospital open. It's weird. I think it's really, really weird that the right wing has just now sat there and said, they'll always talk about the rural America. They'll always talk about, urban problems. And now they're telling everybody to move to Baltimore. Like, figure your shit out. This health issues are not something you just put on your little patchouli lavender oil and like be all like, oh, it cured my mind and body. And, just like grow up. Like, this is a public health interest. I also want to point out really quickly before handing it over to Doobie that Fabian Liberty Scott was describing how one would set up a small clinic and how one would deal with that small clinic. And I really love that he put it that way because he just described how AMR, the American Medical, the ambulance structure and the private industry that no longer exists, that's exactly how they failed. So do some reading up on AMR services. It used to be every ambulance company, rural or a giant urban area, and they no longer exist for exactly the same things that were being quoted by Fabian Liberty Scott. So just go ahead and go read up on that if you're watching this, and you can see how private industry failed in a very public sector that is now thriving as soon as we melded it to fire departments. So I'll let Doobie go now. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fantastic. Thank you for that, especially if you're going to prove Scott wrong. Like, we have all the time in the world for that. Let's go to our friend Doobie, please.
So first of the population of this town specifically, the Greenwood, Mississippi, has dropped by almost 25% since like 1990, I think it is, or no, actually the year 2000. It's even worse. So almost 25% since the year 2000, right? So it doesn't seem like they need the big hospital. Maybe they need a smaller hospital to serve the smaller population. There are tons of clinics in the area, medical doctors, practicing medical doctors. You can Google them. They're all over the fucking city, right? So it's not like they need to drive out 40 minutes to get any kind of healthcare. They can get healthcare within the city that all these clinics exist. But it seems like if you make the decision to live in a small town, 14,000 people, just how many people live in this town, maybe you just need to abandon the idea that you're going to have the big hospital experience, right? Because your town doesn't need a big hospital; it needs a small hospital because it has a small population. That seems reasonable. And again, the other hospitals nearby, I think the one that's closest is like 40 minutes. Well, shit, if you need to drive 40 minutes for an appointment or a surgery or whatever, hey, this is what happens if you want to live in a rural place. You don't get the big city treatment of having everything nearby.
What
It
if you
seems
need
pretty
to
shitty.
drive? What if you need to drive 40 minutes for life-saving care? It's not always just a. It's not always just a doctor's appointment. It's not always just a surgery. Sometimes it is life-saving care. And so in that event, clinics can't do life-saving care. Regular doctor's office can't do life-saving care.
But they probably
Even an urgent care center can't do life-saving
they would
care.
probably have them airlifted out and flown to the hospital that can handle them. Right? If
So
they need to
please
get there
explain to me
immediately.
where the helicopter is that they're going to use to fly them to the hospital, or are they going to have to wait for the helicopter to come for the big
of course
hospital?
they
No
will.
hospitals, but they got a fleet of helicopters.
Wait, hold on,
I'm
not a
sure.
fleet. Hold on, I don't think you guys are being reasonable. So you're telling me that you believe that they need a fleet of helicopters to service
They
their
would need at least
population
one.
of 14,000? Sure, but maybe a county nearby has a helicopter that can get there and pick them up and then swoop off with them.
So then you have to
Right,
wait
which
for
is-
the
which is how
helicopter
it
to get
works.
to where you're at. You're still
Yes,
dying,
Which is how it works.
and then you get in the
which is how it
helicopter, and
works
then
in other
so
places.
I really hope, man. I really
Please,
hope you
stop,
got 45
stop,
minutes to live, my man,
stop,
because
stop.
you're
Let's-
not seeing
But you're
shit for
essentially
45
saying-
minutes.
Let's go to
okay?
let's let Doobie
What you're
go.
essentially saying, Sprout, what you're essentially saying is that if somebody makes a decision to live out in the woods somewhere, right? If they don't have a hospital within like 20 minutes or 15, no, not even 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, then they're being underserved somehow. No, they made a decision to live far away from the population center, so they don't get access to the shit that's in the population center quickly. They ask them to take a drive to get there.
But there's no reason to make it unnecessary. There's no reason to make it unnecessary like burdens for them to go to the hospital. There's no reason for unnecessary burdens. Of course, you're not going to need a massive
Who
hospital,
decides
but
how
you're going
necessary
you're going to need a place that can perform life-saving care. And if they can't perform it, then they could transfer you to a
Again,
different
there-
hospital that
there
can
are
perform
other
life-saving
clinics
care.
in the area with hospital beds, with doctors who can perform life-saving
Ooh.
care.
Yes,
Maybe
they
they
need to wait for
something-
the helicopter
they
to
need something
get
that
to
they
where you're at.
specifically need something that's at the big hospital. It's in the big building, but it's not any of the small clinics for some reason. They need something like
45
that.
minutes. I
Hey,
think we got
yes.
45 minutes.
Then yes, they're gonna
Ooh.
need it. They're gonna need either to be airlifted or they're gonna need to drive. Okay, yes.
Corey.
Well, I just want to ask a question. Like, again, I'm ignorant of boots on the ground United States experience, but from what I understand of what I gather from the article, this is generally pretty much like a very impoverished and underserved community. And to what Doobie was saying is they could just move away. Like from what I sort of understand or maybe sort of implicitly assume of it's not so easy for them to move, and like they're there for generations. Like I assume most families have a long history in that community for a reason, just because it's probably very difficult to escape. But that could be a false assumption on my part.
That's not a false
So
assumption.
it's really interesting.
on, but
you use this term underserved, right? And what I love about that word is that it sneaks in your abhorrent philosophy into it, because they're not underserved. They're served exactly.
Wait, can you look up
as the
underserved in the
market-
dictionary? Can you just go to dictionary.com? Can you show me where underserved?
I would, but you told me to take. I'm already following one of your demands, which was to take a book out of Canada's healthcare policy. So I've already got one.
Yeah, I have no
definition
problem with medical
on the
assistance in
screen.
one
at a time, right? So when you say underserved, there's this implication that they have a right to certain things, right? That they have a right to be served, and that 33 minutes, as one person described it, is against their basic human rights of their ability to a hospital. Which the problem with that is where are you drawing this arbitrary distinction? Like, does every human being in America need to be within 15 minutes of a hospital? Are we
Within
going to build
5.
Right. Are we going to build, like 50,000 hospitals? Where are we going to get the doctors? Because like we're not going to get them from Canada because Canada's bleeding doctors, right? Like, are we going to bring in like a fleet of Mexican doctors to like and open up our immigration policies so that we can staff 50,000 hospitals in America? Like, it's a stupid fucking point, right? Like at the end of the day is the community doesn't have money and they've bled jobs and now they're bleeding people. And if you want the community, if you want to live in a community that has a hospital within 10 minutes, then you need to move to a population center. Like, it's that fucking simple. And the woman gives her advice right at the very end. She said,
So
well, I might move to
yeah.
my family in Baltimore
Wait,
because I know John
wait,
Hopkins isn't going to close anytime
Scott, like,
soon.
well, so like, why why don't you just move to, unclaimed territory to have your Ancapistan utopia? Like, why don't you just move?
That's a
Why don't you just
Literally all unclaimed territory in the entirety of the world as it sets right now is 7 square kilometers. That is
No,
known as
you
Lieberland.
there's I think there's
So-
Lieberland, very small, and you even brought up yourself
Yeah,
like the
Corey, there's no reason
like,
to bring up the ANCAP thing. What he just said works within the current system. Like all of his points make sense within the current system. We can't set 50,000 fucking hospitals across the country.
We don't have
that
to.
don't-
We don't have to.
the
The
way you
average.
should
So
go-
wait. So
That's what he said. I'm repeating what he said to you. Right? So
People in
per-
Montana
so
live
per-
30
instead of
so
bringing
per-
up ANCAP, I know it's an ANCAP and it's funny, but there's no reason to bring it up right now. Just tell us why you think. So if there's a community, and there are communities in the United States of like 500 people, 600 people, does this get a fucking massive hospital because there's a community there?
So per
so-
Pew Research,
well,
I'm
let's
gonna
Spartacus
throw
then.
facts here. Per Pew Research, the South Atlantic 13.3 minutes away from a hospital by car average. Middle Atlantic 11.7 minutes away. New England 13.0 minutes away. East North Central 12.4 minutes away. East South Central 14.2. West South Central 12.3.
You don't need to
West
read this
North
all off. What
Central
are you trying to prove with
15.8,
this? What are you trying to
13.7,
prove?
11.4, and 11.4. What you're looking at
It's all
is
under 15.
you're looking at there's only one that's above 15 by 0.8 minutes. So that's the West North Central at 15.8. So you're not adding 50,000 hospitals or some asinine number like that to make everyone within a 15-minute by car.
Everyone?
Wait, that's an average.
You're talking about averages.
That is
What the
average.
fuck are you
Yes.
talking
What I'm
about?
saying is you're not adding 50,000 hospitals. That's not going to happen. It's an unnecessary number and it's exaggerated to try and prove your point. But most of the country, as it is, has an average right now of less than 15 minutes.
This is
So-
how we know that
Average.
you know
We're
about
talking about like rural
THC8,
town.
because you must be smoking something to come up with an
Yeah, I'm
argument
definitely
that says,
smoking something.
I'm going to
No,
use
there's
averages
the
that include
Yes,
people
there's
living in a
averages.
fucking
There
city.
are people that
Like,
are people that are
how
No,
many
we're
outside.
talking about rural
hospitals-
towns with fucking.
You-
Some of these towns have populations under 1,000 people.
Oh shit!
Right? This is
So
included
there
in
are-
your average.
Are you going to build 15
there are-
hospitals in Appalachia? Like, what are you talking about?
So there are
So
there,
it's
there
all
are
right,
people.
Scott. We need those hospitals.
So there are people that are outliers. You're going to have outliers, right? But the large
Yeah,
majority, it's not
This
going
one's
to
an
take 50
outlier.
for the large majority. Listen, don't talk. Listen, I know, wrong hole. I get
Hey,
it.
listen,
It's hard
you're
for
just
you to
saying
figure that out.
stupid shit.
So, the large majority, it's not going to take 50,000 hospitals to do that.
Yeah. So
We're not talking
I'm
about the large
gonna
majority. We're talking about the rural minority.
jump in. All right. So medical deserts in the United States. I'm gonna read straight off the Wikipedia
It's another
article.
desert.
Right.
Got it.
It's a great. Yes, it's another desert. We found another
All
desert,
these
DB.
fucking
Indeed.
deserts.
Oh my
So-
God.
The United States has many regions which have been described as medical deserts, with those locations featuring inadequate access to one or more kinds of medical services. That's going to set our friend Scott off. An estimated 30 million Americans, many in rural regions of the country, live at least a 60-minute drive, an hour, from a hospital with trauma care services. Limited access to emergency room services as well as medical specialists lead to increases in mortality rates and long-term health problems such as heart disease and diabetes, right? So you guys get who we're talking about here. So we can come up with simple standards, right? Like, so our friend Scott here, right, wants to make set some impossible standard that no one else is actually trying to meet, right? To say that we'd have to have 50,000 hospitals. No, we don't have to do all that, right? We can simply say that within this region, right, for a certain amount of population, we should have some sort of medical center specifically that can do trauma care, right? That's one of the big things, right? Like if you can't get trauma care within a certain amount of time, then you're obviously dead. So it doesn't mean you can even start with just like trauma care services, right? Like a small hospital that just has trauma care services rather than like some sort of large big city type of setup, right? And just make sure that across the country, just like how we kind of like district, like we have a certain amount of people within a district, we do that every 10 years, we can do that with hospitals to make sure that people have the care that they need. No, we don't have to ensure that people who are living in literally bumfuck nowhere, right, in a single cabin, have immediate access. If you're looking at an entire region and looking at the amount of population there, then you can start making calculations. These things are easily done. We can accomplish these things, right?
PrimeCayes,
Go ahead.
Do you believe that healthcare is a human right?
Absolutely.
So why is it that you're now saying, well, we'll only deny rights to certain rural people? Because you believe it's a right. You believe everyone should have a right to it. So why are we not building a hospital or at least trauma care within 15 minutes of every human that lives in America?
That's not a standard that I set, so whatever, right? So I'm saying that like,
well, no, you just said it was a human right.
Yeah, I said I did say it was a human right. Absolutely. I'm saying though, the way for practicality purposes, what we could do is set up like a medical like region, right? We could just divide the country into like medical districts, and see like how much medical care is available for a certain number of population centers. That's how we could do it. That's a practical way of looking at this.
Okay,
right. So we'll have incremental socialism, but we'll still be denying people rights because you believe that it's human.
You could, keep trying it. It's not going to work. Keep going. What are you saying, DB?
To be clear, I do want incremental
away from it
universal health.
Oh, nice try.
But really quickly, so Prime, so what you said actually makes sense, right? Smaller hospital that can provide some kind of trauma care, etc. Like that makes sense. But if I don't know if you've looked at this hospital, then what we're talking about, it's a pretty large hospital for a very small town, right? So if they just got rid of this location, downsized to something more reasonable for the city, the town that they're in, that makes sense. I have no fucking problem with that. I don't think that we should be funneling money to something this large when it seems like the community just doesn't need it, and it's and maybe the fact that they are not able to keep their doors open, not able to pay their bills, is an indication that the overhead here is too much. Right? They have like over 500 employees, almost 300 beds, a really large fucking hospital for a small town.
So I might.
So they just need to downsize.
So I might be able to agree with you, but I'm not super familiar with this entire like medical landscape that's there. So people travel, right? So maybe for this specific town, yes, that hospital might be too big, especially since drunk so much, right? You pointed it out. So that's actually very helpful, but. People travel from other surrounding towns, right? And it becomes like a nexus. So maybe if we were to divide things up, then it would make sense to keep this particular hospital around because it services many people outside of the city limits or the county limits. So that could be the case. But maybe we might have to downsize it. It could go either way.
Well, so in my research before the panel. So I actually checked, right, if there are any other hospitals in the area that could service these people. There are multiple hospitals in the area. Actually, they're in the state, just FYI, I look it up really quickly. There is an air care helicopter force, locations all over the state that services the entire state. So yeah, they could airlift people from this place to somebody else, hypothetically, right? But that being said, there are like 3 or 4 other hospitals. I think they're all like 40 minutes out, right? So yeah, if you're coming from another town, you might get stuck in this place somehow, 40 minutes from these other hospitals, and it makes more sense to go to this one. But still, it seems like even in that situation, you're not going to have hundreds of people stuck in this hospital on these beds, right? And if that did start happening, there'd probably be like a massive health problem in the community, and it would need to involve the other hospitals anyway. So it just seems like they just need to downsize. This one should fail, be replaced with something more competitive, much more suited to the community.
The problem is the amount of government intervention that is required in terms of building new hospitals. So there can't be competition in the market because they're priced out of the market because Mississippi is a certificate, they have con boards, right? So it takes a lot of capital investment to deal with all of the bureaucratic red tape that is very expensive and takes a lot of time in order to build a hospital. So, like, if someone wanted to come in, if you got rid of con boards, someone just con boards alone, much less all of the other regulations on healthcare, it's one of the most regulated industries in America. But if you just were allowed to come in the market and say, look, this hospital sucks. They have the lights on. They're wasting money for this giant facility, right? They just got rid of, what is it, their neonatal and pregnancy care center, right? They got rid of some things, but they're wasting money on all these things. So I'm going to create a much smaller model with a much smaller building that's cheaper rent, that it's cheaper to keep the lights on, et cetera, and compete with this hospital, right? Then you could easily get rid of that hospital with the market without ever having a quote unquote underserved community. But it's the state enforcement and regulation and central planning like PrimeCayes wants that has caused this problem to begin with. Not to mention the fact that they had to get a big loan that just, oh, I don't know, happened during the pandemic, almost like some of their financial problems might also be the cause of fucking government lockdowns to begin with as well.
Oh, okay.
You-
Sorry. Just quickly, Aiko, we can hear whatever you're doing for your hands, like that sound, whatever you're
sorry.
doing. We can hear that. But you want to say something? Go ahead.
Oh yeah. But also you can have some unintended consequences to the profit motive as well. Like if you can take a large hospital and
It's not
downsize
centrally
it.
planned. There's no such thing as unintended consequences from the
I've
profit model.
I've talked to friends of mine who are doctors at some larger hospitals, and I've asked them these questions too about rural areas before, because this was a big talking point about 10 years ago when people were talking about Medicaid expansion to begin with and why these rural hospitals were at risk of failing. And all of this was predicted. And a lot of it was that if you start downsizing these hospitals, let's say, yeah, you don't necessarily need a neonatal care that's 15 minutes away. So maybe you can get rid of that in a hospital and have people go a further distance away. Problem is those departments might be more profitable, and the trauma center that you'd like to have is less profitable. And so now you've actually made problems worse, not better, because you're closing down areas that are larger profit centers. Or here's an example that happened to my mom. She had a stroke a couple of years ago. We took her. We were actually very close to the hospital. We got there within 5 minutes, and getting there that fast allowed her to get the initial care she needed, and it saved her life. But they needed to get her as fast as possible to a stroke center, and there wasn't one in that hospital. Uh, so they put her on a care flight, and they took her into Dallas, which was it was about an hour before she finally got into where she needed to be through this care flight. Well, turns out I found out later that just 3 blocks away from where we were was Presbyterian Hospital, which was an entirely different hospital system. She could have gone there and would have gotten care much faster. But the reason she didn't, as we found out later, was that Baylor wanted to keep her business within the Baylor system.
Wow.
And so she was sent to a hospital further away through a very expensive care flight because they wanted to keep her in the system. Like that to me is like that's the sort of thing that needs to get fixed.
Capitalism at its finest.
Yeah, if you're
That's an intended consequence, though.
if you're in a rural, yeah, that's probably true. If you're in a rural area, then getting to the nearest hospital, like that's even more important, because the more profitable hospital to send somebody might be considerably further away than the nearest hospital or the nearest area that can serve these things. So I think a lot of it has to do with the profit incentive within the system, and also the way in which more profitable areas of hospitals pay for less profitable areas.
Yeah, that's not profit incentive, right? Because the profit incentive would make you disincentivized from doing that, because unless you had some form of prior agreement with your insurance company or contract, that's likely an act of aggression, and you should sue, and that should hurt your profits immeasurably when you do something like intentionally prolong the care that you've promised to provide in such a way that it could lead to death or permanent damage. So the profit incentive would actually be to go to the nearby hospital, but we have such a mixed market economy that I doubt that. But I mean,
What?
of course, mistakes happen. Let's see, but that's not a profit incentive. Like,
How
you'd
would that not be an
disincentivized for
incentive?
doing that in a free market.
No,
I mean,
no.
this was
Oh.
Baylor. This was Baylor in the Baylor system. She was care flighted an hour away to another Baylor hospital when a competing hospital was nearby.
Yeah, they made a
Yeah,
lot of
I don't
money.
know how they profit from that.
Well,
Yeah, but if you but you're
You do
looking at
profit.
profit. You're looking at profit as well. So long as they stay in the system, we'll make more money off of this transaction, right? But if you make
Mhm.
decisions that cause you to get sued because you violated people's rights, and you're going to get a lot less money, and therefore the profit incentive would disincentivize you from doing those actions.
if you get sued, if people understand that they've been wronged, if you are have the reserves, like you have the money to afford a person like Lactoid to do the suing for you, right? Like if all that's the case, then yes, sure.
If there's
I
not
guess
something in
maybe.
the
Or if you just have
waivers that you
insurance.
signed, or if your
Yeah.
insurance company says that it's okay for them to do it that way,
Yeah.
or even preferred for them to do it that way, there are a lot of different
Yeah, I mean, if you
reasons why.
voluntarily sign something to that'll put you in harm's way, that's your
Yeah,
fault.
you
It's
know,
not theirs.
while his
Yeah, your
mother's
mom's
bleeding
having a
out.
stroke and they
Yeah.
can't care for her until I sign something. I'm gonna stop, like it's
Hey,
like
you
I'm
didn't-
asking whether or not to round up my dollar,
Yeah.
That's not
so
what
that
I
I can.
He's
That's not what I said.
he's
It's
gonna
like, if you
email it to
sign
Lactoid.
something-
Lactoid's
No,
gonna get
if you
back
s-
to him in 2 business days, right? And then
If you
he'll-
sign something, no, if you sign something that voluntarily ahead of time says, in the event of an emergency, we reserve the right to keep you within our hospital system, even if there's like a closer such and such. Yeah, that's on you. Now, if you're talking about in the moment, someone wants to try and coerce you into signing care to stay within their system, like that, then we start getting into more complex contract
But
law. from a
coercion
common law
is someone
perspective of,
dying.
like,
That's the coercion.
right.
Right?
Well, I get what
If you
Fabian's
have a-
saying now. He's saying that when I first bought the insurance, or when my
Right.
mom first bought the insurance, like, of course, how many of us read the fine print and then are able to project into the
You
future
shouldn't
what we
sign
think
shit
our
you don't
issues are going to
understand.
be?
No one should sign shit they don't understand.
But I assume you don't agree with
Especially if
every
you
terms
can't
of
predict
service
the
that you've
future.
clicked through.
I
But
literally
there's,
agree to
and then there's
That's
also the
not how
fact
I would
that
run the
with
business, but I agree.
like that's if you even have a choice though, right? Because in America, most people get their insurance through their employer, so you might not have a choice there. But I guess they should also find if an employer who has different insurance plan, right? Who has a proper pay in the industry that you can work with. All those things should happen, right? Every person can probably calibrate their life within this capitalistic system. Sure. But I think that
Yeah, you should read your insurance plan before you sign shit.
you should
I don't think that's a
absolutely read it. I
complicated
didn't say
thing.
that you shouldn't read it, but I'm saying that doesn't mean you necessarily have a choice. If you're getting it through your employer, then what the fuck are you going to do about it? Like, I don't know. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
What the fuck are
Or
you going
that
to
you-
do about it?
People are
Just
saying-
move
Or that you
employers
that they
understand
can't-
all the
people are saying
ramifications,
they
like
can't hear
10 years down the line.
It can
you're
not hear you. Hear you.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had a couple of people come in, like Zonia came in and was like, "Hey, I can't hear you in Prime."
In my stream,
Yeah,
maybe
like I'm like super quiet or something.
I can try to pump
Just
you up.
letting I don't know.
Yeah. I'll try to put the volume up a bit. So yeah, hopefully.
But so I do want to address a point that do be made earlier in terms of like relocation, et cetera, and maybe allowing the hospital to fail. So like I'm not 1,000% committed to like keeping the hospital open, and like in principle, like I can see if it's totally as you say, pretty much like it's much bigger than it needs to be, then like totally like scaling it down is like reasonable, and again. Like Canada has, I think, pretty like remote and rural areas too, and so while I said that, generally speaking, hospitals don't close in Canada, but what I would also say is that there's the sort of reciprocal of like it's also like much rarer for a new hospital to be built, and so like one of the ways that we attempt to, I'm not saying this is the perfect way, but one of the solutions that we have found is like so in certain areas, in for example like the Yukon. Like we actually like fly doctors there for a temporary amount of time, saying like, here's your 2-week window to get whatever you're screening, etc., etc. Like I can see something like that as like it doesn't have to be like you have to absolutely keep the hospital open. I think there are multiple solutions.
Wait, but there are already other clinics in the area. There are private clinics in the area with medical doctors who are practicing who can do that kind of stuff.
You're saying in this town?
In
Yeah.
Mississippi, yeah.
Yeah, well, no, in this specific town too. Like there are tons of little clinics around.
Yeah, but from what I understand, sort of as I was alluded to earlier, like the pregnancy unit and like the neonatal intensive care unit was like shut down. And so like I'm not saying like you have to keep the entire infrastructure. Like we also have like there are hospitals that we have in Canada where like over time like there's been less need for them. We like shut down like, the entire wing of a hospital.
Yeah, so let me answer your question. So do you guys have like you said you have rural areas. So what about what's it called? Just looking at it 1 second.
Yukon, Nunavut, Northwest Territories.
Hazleton, even better. Okay.
Okay, sure.
Population less than 500 people. They do have a hospital, but if you look at it, it's like a clinic. It's a very small, single-story building, very small thing, which it makes sense with the population size. So if there's something more specialized that hospital can handle, like let's say maybe they're not equipped to handle pregnancy or difficulties in pregnancy, or maybe they're not equipped to handle surgery, or someone gets their fucking spine split in half or something. What would happen? They'd get airlifted somewhere else.
Yeah,
right.
That is true.
Well, this
absolutely.
is exactly what would happen in this situation. Like, yeah, so you can have the smaller clinics, the smaller hospitals. If you need something more specialized, yeah, airlift them somewhere else. It's fine.
But if that's there, then they should be able to handle like the basic life-saving care that you would expect of
What does
an
that mean?
emergency
What does
room.
basic life-saving care mean?
What you would expect to receive in an emergency room. You would expect someone
Like
to be
what?
able. You would expect someone to be able to treat gunshot wounds. You would expect someone to be able to treat a broken
Especially
arm.
in rural areas.
You would expect someone to be able to treat a hernia, kidney
Yeah, so
stone,
again,
yada yada yada.
There are lots of small clinics in the area, and I'm sure could treat a broken arm, a kidney stone, maybe even a gunshot wound, right? I don't know about these specific.
So
clinics.
if you have a gunshot wound, you're
but even
required
if
to
they
go to
were-
an emergency room.
Even if they were to downsize this hospital, they could still, again, keep a functioning hospital with an emergency room that can handle this sorts of emergency situations. All I'm suggesting is that they don't need a hospital this large, and it makes sense to downsize because their population is reduced by almost 25% in the last 20 years.
All I'm suggesting is that they maintain the emergency life-saving care
Sure.
that is needed for that hospital.
Sure, but they don't need a giant.
I'm not saying they don't. I'm not saying they couldn't use a downsize. I'm just suggesting that, like, even in a town full of 500, that they should be able to have something relatively close that they can go to and be like, I need life-saving care. I just got shot. I need help.
Sure.
Like I don't think
There's
anyone's
also-
making the argument of like we have to like absolutely maintain this specific infrastructure, given that what you said, and I absolutely take it as true. Like if the population reduces, like if there's absolutely like no need for it, I don't think anyone's saying like it has to be maintained this way, like in perpetuity type of thing.
There's also another factor here, and that is every hospital has, like I said, profitable parts of their business, but they also have some customers that are more profitable than others. And when they have someone who comes in who's uninsured and they have to take care of them anyway, then that costs them a certain amount of money, and that money comes out of the income that they get from other customers. And if you're in a state like, let's take for instance in Texas, in order to qualify for ACA, like in private insurance, you've got to be above the poverty line, or in some cases 133% or above of the poverty line in order to qualify for that insurance. But here in Texas, in order to qualify for Medicaid, you have to have income that's below 50% of the poverty line, which means from 50% to 100 to 133%, that's called the Medicaid donut hole. Those people have no coverage at all. So when they show up to the hospital can't enroll them in Medicaid, and they're not able to qualify for private insurance plans, subsidized private insurance plans. And so you have this big chunk of the population that comes in that is a cost burden for that hospital. If you're in a state that's expanded Medicaid, then they'll qualify for Medicaid if they're below 133%. And so at that point, you have a lot more rural hospitals that don't have to absorb that extra cost. And so the odds of any given hospital closing goes down.
Wait,
So
if
the
you're
problem
above
here,
if you're above the poverty line, like I'm
Yes.
confused. So like if you're above the poverty line, you could just buy insurance, right? If you're above
Right. But if you're below the poverty line, but above 50% of the poverty line, then you're in the donut hole.
So you're telling me that you can be 50% under, like you can be making half, like between 0 and the poverty line, you can be making like half that, and
Yes,
all-
and yes. Welcome to the state of Texas, and a lot of
based.
states, a lot of conservative states are like that too, like throughout the South. So I'm sure Mississippi's like that too. I just don't know the numbers for Mississippi like I do Texas. But yeah, if you're above 50%, if you're in that donut hole, then you don't qualify for anything. You can't get ACA subsidies, and you can't qualify for Medicaid. You're sort of in this limbo. And hospitals have to absorb the cost if they're going to treat you, and they can't turn
And
you
they have
away
to-
if it's
yep, they have to
life-saving
treat
care.
you.
Yeah, they have to
Yeah.
treat you. So that means basically your local hospital becomes a charity case for you.
the problem with this is it seems like the people that are for helping this hospital are really only looking at the situation in hand. And they're not looking at what they're establishing as a moral norm, what they're establishing as into the economy, and like like they're consequentialists looking at a freeze frame. It's very strange to me, right? Like I don't think anyone like on its face, I think most people go, here's a hospital that's dying. Here's 60,000 people that are like being forced by circumstances to drive out to these other hospitals. It's not really a big deal for us to like grab money that's like pennies in the bucket as far as the tax structure is concerned to like maintain these people and like hopefully fix something. And like that sounds good, right? It sounds like like we're helping people out, but you're not actually helping anybody. You're hurting people. And the reason you're hurting people is that you're establishing several things. First, you're pulling the hospital system more out of the market, which means the incentive structure of the profit motive is taken away to another degree. This stifles innovation. If a hospital knows that if it starts doing poorly, it can just beg the government for money, then it knows that it doesn't have to figure out ways to reduce healthcare costs. This increases healthcare costs for all of us. Another thing that it does is that it pulls money from all of us, right? Like we have to recognize that tax money comes from a place, and that tax money comes from a place that stifles GDP because it's money taken away from our pockets. It means less available jobs, lower wages in America, less business growth, higher inflation because GDP is reduced, right? So like monetary inflation is affected. All of these are problems that when you take this money and start injecting it into this system. Meanwhile, a large portion of the problem here is that we don't have a market here. We don't actually have a profit incentive. What you're doing is you're saying socialism caused this problem, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to interject more socialism, and hopefully it won't cause more of the same fucking
Socialism
problem.
caused this problem. How did socialism cause this problem? I beg your pardon. Did you not go check the AMR like I asked you to?
What I know that you were
Need to do your
gone for a
homework,
long while,
Scott.
but I've been participating in this debate.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we're charging my system, my entire HVAC system, and my boiler. So I apologize, but it took us that long, and they're just now leaving and having dinner. So, people with jobs, the ones you're saying you want to protect. All right, settle down. Fucking weirdo.
Okay, so no, I didn't look at your AMR situation. I don't. What about it? Make your argument.
Well, our AMR situation was the
Mhm.
private situation. Like the cost was so fucking high. The bills were triple what they are now, and they're already pretty bad. EMTs were overworked. EMTs were committing suicide at massive rates. They were crashing the vehicles. They weren't sleeping. We couldn't keep EMTs. We couldn't even get paramedics. And so what we did is we took it as a public service. It's all throughout America now. There is no AMR anymore. Okay. It's not the American Medical Response System anymore. And we combined them all to the public sector. And now we have qualified paramedics. You have to be on a waiting list to get this job. Like people are staying. We have good shifts. We have enough workers to handle this. And it's actually less expensive. One of the things about rural hospitals is if you have your emergency service transport vehicles and you have them going several miles away, it ends up becoming more expensive in the long run. And that is a public service. So if people are going to Baltimore for the nearest hospital, what you're actually starting to look at is the public sector service that's already handling the emergency calls now has to go all the way to Baltimore and come back. We're looking at gas problems. We're looking at more shift work that needs to be done. We're looking at overworked EMTs again. We're looking at having to get, drivers that are specifically drivers for this particular thing.
Right. So that was a really long, like, positive, message to,
It
having
took
the
25,
state take
no,
over
no, it took
this.
25
Right.
years to
But
fall. It took 25 years to fall.
okay, but you're not comparing like terms in any way. So your comparison is irrelevant, right? One is one surviving in the market, which is highly regulated, and then the other is one that doesn't have profit. The money is taken from somewhere. So you don't know what the economy would have done in that time period without that taxation, right? So you're taking a variable and just being like, it's magic money, right? Like, no, the money comes from taxes,
Where did I
right?
say
Which
magic?
is money
Where did
taken
I say
out
magic
of the
money?
economy.
No, 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 no. You just made that up and pulled it out of your ass. Where did I say
No,
magic money? I said this is already a publicly funded service. This publicly
it's not.
funded service gets more expensive if we have to take everybody from the rural town I used to live in and get them all the way over to Denver, which is 4 hours away, in an
Mhm.
ambulance, you're looking at something 1,000 times more expensive than actually trying to, I don't know, invest in the hospital with Flight for Life, invest in the hospital with other transportation services that's to a, closer to a bigger hub. We're going to actually save more money. You're not going to tell me that let's see, on average, in a month, we have about 780 cases that do this. I used to be a volunteer firefighter here, and I'm EMT certified and hazmat certified before I joined the Army. So there was about 500 then. There's about 780 transport cases where I live out of a town of 68,000 per month. If we have to go more than 500 miles, but about 400 miles from where I live, if we have to go that far to Denver, up Vale Pass, we are looking at loss of life. We are looking at horrendous costs. What we did instead is we started getting Flight for Life, these helicopters that are all tricked out, as actual mobile intensive care units. And we started sending them in lieu of ourselves to the hospitals. They made their money back within 3 years. On top of making their money back within 3 years, now every hospital that's rural, again, we live in the mountains, okay? You don't play on our roads. We spend billions on our roads to keep them open. So our Flight for Life has managed to infuse these hospitals with cash. They have paid it off quickly. And these hospitals are absolutely vital because there are some areas where we would rather risk an avalanche with Flight for Life than actually try to drive there because you can be 45 miles away from a place and it can take you 3 hours depending on the mountain road we have here. So it actually fucking worked. And we're not taxing the public service, which is the fire department and the transportation services of ambulances, like threefold the cost it would have been to keep the hospital open. Does that make sense?
Right. But again, it doesn't actually address any of my concerns. You're saying that the state was able to implement a program that was more effective than what the market was currently doing in terms of the consequential like outcomes that you're looking at. The problem is that in no way, shape, or form was that not simply a market void in which the private corporations or companies could have been doing the same thing if it was such a great thing that like saved everybody money. And you're saying, well, we're not taxing the services, the EMS services. But where is that tax money coming from? Is it not funded at all, or is it taxed at the hospitals? Like you haven't addressed the issue that these aren't like terms.
Tax here. So here in the state of Colorado, I have a 13% tax rate for sales tax. Um,
Mhm.
so we're paying for it with the taxes here. Here's the thing. That has not lifted. The last time we went from 11% of a sales tax rate to 13% of a sales tax rate, um, that was over the 2008 crisis. We didn't see an increase in our taxes because we managed to synthesize and combine so many like services that we were able to actually dig ourselves out of the hole, the very problematic hole. And I will admit immediately to you that the state of Colorado probably has a much bigger problem when it comes to emergency transport just because of the nature of our roads. Like there's one road to get on the other side of the Great Divide, you have to go through a granite mountain, and there's only one access point. So I will say that probably Colorado had a bigger hill to climb. We probably had a mountain, whatever. We
Mhm.
probably had a much more difficult situation because of our topography. But outside of our topography, we literally just combined all of the like services and did not see an increase in our taxes at all. We didn't see an increase in our taxes until 2008, actually. Until
You're saying
that market of yours
a
went
new
crash and
program,
fucking burned.
a new program was created, and it didn't increase taxes at all. How did they
No.
fund said program? Where did the money come from
So
to fund it?
so Colorado has managed to have like a surplus. So when I say an 11% tax rate, I mean like we have
So money
pretty
was
much,
taken from
of course,
taxes, right?
of course.
And then
But my
given to
point
fund this
is this,
program. They're not like
it's now
terms.
right. We funded a market that failed. So we came up with a solution because your market couldn't. If your market fails, kick it the fuck out and we'll do it ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, that doesn't make
It's
any
far
sense. You have
better,
a highly
actually.
regulated market, and then you have something that isn't a business that is using stolen funds from taxpayers to fund this program. You're saying,
Dear.
look at how great this program was. And it's like, yeah, but they're not like terms.
Stolen funds? Are you okay. I did not know I was dealing with like a full-blown it's theft. Get off
Yeah.
my
Do you
road.
know who you're talking to?
Right? Where have
That-
you
Get off
been?
Got
I didn't
But
know
also-
you were
I'm
talking-
I'm the
Oh.
largest libertarian in fucking Twitch politics.
Why are
Like,
you on the internet? You do know that this was a publicly funded experiment that we now have access to, right? Just get the fuck off. You don't belong here. Bye.
Just like SpaceX.
that's
private
not the
corporations
dub you
came along
think
and
it
made
is.
better.
Like,
But
Like-
it
like,
also,
what is it?
but it also sounds like, if I'm hearing Stabby right, it sounds like what's happened. What I think I heard her say that they were already publicly funding like fire stations, and that they just rolled this into that public funding, and so they were able to leverage like spending that was already happening and just getting more functionality out of it. Is that right?
And there's one thing that we did borrow from. I will say that. We borrowed and we did fundraisers so that we could get people who were they were AMR service workers, especially in Denver. And one of the things we did is we did get the state to use an education fund that could get you into the fire department kind of in an apprentice role. And then we also had you volunteer firefighting while you were getting your EMS certification up to state standards. And we did borrow from an education fund for that. That one had nothing to do at all with emergency services. It had nothing at all to do with how those were funded. Hazmat ended up having to be that way, if I recall. There was something that went wrong there.
So
But
I-
what we did is we did roll those in.
So I wanted to get back to some of the core issues here. So I think actually, by some of my other friends think here that socialism actually will solve this issue. Absolutely. I think it's the
Fucking nods.
Yeah, I'm with you, Prime. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. There's no other way.
And of course,
I think that it's interesting that what Scott wants, right? He wants to, and in case, and make sure I'm correct, you want to massively deregulate the medical field, the specifically about the hospital creation field. Correct? Just yes or no on that one, Scott?
I mean, I'm an incrementalist, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So then, because he talked about like all the like the red tape you got to go through to build one of these, like red tape, like building codes, right, to make sure that the hospital doesn't
look
collapse.
into con boards.
Red
Con boards are a whole
tape.
nother level of red tape. Like
Sure.
building a hospital
I
is
am.
one of the most bureaucratic, expensive, and
should
ridiculous things to do in those states.
be.
it's supposed to be.
So,
Ironically, California, not a certificate of need board state.
Do you know what has more red tape than our hospitals here in the United States or actually anywhere in the Western world? Building code in Japan when you're building on an active fault line. Way more red tape.
But
I don't
yeah,
know
Isn't
what your
that
point
somewhat good?
Snapple facts. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
like I'll take a Snapple fact. Like
That's
I
quite the
didn't know that.
reference, Scott.
Yeah.
Quite the reference.
Snapple
I
facts,
mean,
right?
no,
Yeah.
seriously. So the red tape is to make sure that those places are safe, to make sure that those places are operating above board, to make sure that those places don't have like that one guy who was killing people with insulin all those years.
Yeah, I mean, like that. This is exactly what you have to like. It's necessary, right? Like hospitals, yes, are. I mean, I used to work in a hospital. An extremely regulated environment and for damn good reasons, right? Not now. I'm not going to back every single regulation. I'm sure you can find me things that I would say maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe something we need to look at. But overall, right, we need a strong regulatory regime where we're talking about the people who are in charge of your life. Right? I don't know. I feel like that's like a good plan.
You want to know the real
right?
story? You want to know the real story where this started?
And then the second thing is this
Lefty will
idea
love
of
it.
competition, right? So I think I'm not sure if DB said that, but I think Lactoid did and Scott. The idea that once these things close, necessarily something else will rise in its place, right, to fill that hole in the market. But that's not how these things usually work, right? And in fact, if that was the case, then we wouldn't be having this issue of medical deserts in the first place, because these things disappear and then they go away, like they're gone for good. But sorry, I guess of course we have to lower the regulations. So first lower the regulations, and then have a
Market's not free enough.
and
If the people leave, of course it'll close
exactly right. Have a hospital that isn't up to code, that isn't up to snuff, right? That provides that has to provide a lower standard of care, and then that will replace, right? Like, yeah, sure. Why not even have medically trained doctors? I mean, I'm sure we can find some people who are competent enough, I guess, to like operate on people. But why not?
PrimeCayes, let me tell you the real reason why regulations started in the medical industry with doctors in America. And the leftists, you guys are gonna love this story. If you're like an ANCOM communist or something, you're gonna love this shit. What the real reason all of these regulations started hitting doctors, especially in the AMA and things like that, was because poor coal miners and factory workers in the 1800s started creating something known as the lodge system, where they collectively got together to bargain to be able to get doctors. And what it started to do is the elite, wealthy, capitalist class individuals started getting really fucking mad that poor workers that were on strike and things like that were able to set up a mutual aid system that allowed them to go into the marketplace and say, you know what? You're not good of enough a doctor for us, or you're too expensive. And they started, how dare these poor plebeians start setting price in the market and telling us that we're not good enough, or that that we're not worth the amount of money that we're paying. And so all of a sudden, large associations start forming, and the wealthy get together and they start using the power of the state to saying, you know what, this is a problem. We don't have proper licensing. We need state granted monopoly in the AMA, and we need to make sure that there's more and more regulation. And bit by bit, the lodge system was destroyed by the state. What year? I don't know the exact year. It'd be 1800s lodge system. I want to say like mid to late 1800s.
That's funny because the very first medical regulations actually were Renaissance Italy. But you know, I guess you can't read. Nice. Good to know.
Are you fucking retarded? Like, I didn't. What? America's never had a true free market. Oh my god. You know what? Just go whatever you say. You're gonna make my point better for me by just appearing as dumb as you fucking are.
Sure.
Go for it.
So we actually had our very first regulations in the 1600s before we were actually the United States. So you sitting here like having some kind of like conspiracy yarn you're like going to like get out of nowhere is fucking hilarious.
Roger.
Some of the first regulations.
I don't even need that's so fucking stupid and such like a fucking non sequitur of what I'm saying that like I don't need to respond.
No, you just made up a fucking story.
Oh, wait, hold on. Was the first regulation, or like was there like maybe an increase in regulation around the time Scott's talking about, or like what does it matter if the first regulation happened then?
No, one of the first ones that happened once we were a nation that we carried over from British law was about passing board examinations to be a practicing physician. So that you couldn't get in trouble for some of the things like people died a lot, whether they got medical care or not. So that was one of the first regulations in the United States.
So it could just be that
it was right before the Revolution.
Should it just be the case that our friend Scott is talking about another set of regulations in the long list. Like, may not be the first, certainly, but like, okay. But it could just be.
Which regulations? That's why I
Well,
asked for a date.
specific.
Which regulations?
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to ask Scott here, but specifically, he's talking about like the AMA being created as a way of destroying this lodge system. So I don't know specifically which one, but it just could be another one that was created but at a later point in time, right? Yeah, I don't know. But so
Look into the history of the lodge system. It's really fucking complicated.
That's
So can we talk about the regulation that I think is relevant to this topic, which is EMTALA, right? Which is the bill that Ronald Reagan signed that said that hospitals can't turn you away for certain kinds of care when you come over. And it seems to me that everything else that followed was a result of that. Because if we're talking about the Medicaid donut hole and the fact that these rural hospitals are having to take on the burden of uninsured people that come to them because they're responsible for doing that, we've got to at least come up with a way where, I mean, it seems like we have a choice. You can either have the government cover these people, which is what Medicaid is, or you can expect the private hospitals to take on that burden and become some sort of mandated unfunded charity. And it seems to me that the Medicaid option is far superior to those two options, even though these same studies that say that Medicaid expansion has helped, it hasn't stopped the decline of rural hospitals. So we're going to need more solutions than that. But it does seem to me that the fact that EMTALA passed in the first place in the 80s, was signed by a Republican, very popular Republican president, and has never been repealed, is because the American people sort of, even though they don't necessarily want to pay for a lot of Medicaid for people because they don't like the taxes that are associated with it, they also recoil at the idea of refusing care to people who need it. And of course, it's even worse when you consider all other kinds of treatments that are not covered by EMTALA, like the cancer treatments and things like that, or extended like with my sister, she had a heart condition. But you've got to have you have to have a choice. You have to be able to turn people away, or you've got to come up with some way of paying for it. And if you don't do one of those two things, then rural hospitals just aren't sustainable.
Yeah, so I don't disagree. So I think Lactoid did bring this up earlier. I think also Doobie as well, in terms of like the population density just isn't there to like fund these healthcare services. I would agree that's a problem, which is why like I'm not opposed to like again through probably like monetary means of like empowering these people if they want to relocate to population dense areas, as in to allow them to move closer to a hospital. Like I'm not opposed to that solution either. I'm not saying we have to build like a super hospital next to like, you know, a town of like 100 people. But I'm also not opposed to like empowering these people to relocate if they actually want to relocate.
What about people who
But
don't want to relocate?
what if they inherited the family farm, right? And they're just trying to keep this family farm going, right? And then that unexplicably takes away their drive to the hospital, to where it's an enormous drive to the hospital. It's very hard to get to the hospital, but I'm here trying to run the farm. I'm here doing what America needs, because believe it or not, farmers get subsidies to farm, especially when it's something the government needs, but it's not extremely profitable for the farmer. So it seems like the farmer is needed, right? It seems like the farmer is needed, but then again, they don't have access to medical care should they need it, or at least not quick access.
Well,
Yeah.
It sounds like they need to sell the farm to somebody else who can maybe run it better.
To someone else who
run
can,
it without the concern that they
to
have.
someone else who
in
cannot have medical
hospital.
access.
A massive corporation would be better at running that farm. Okay, sell it to one of them. Let them run the
Provides health
farm,
insurance.
feed America, and they can move to the city with their healthcare. Okay?
So you're not okay with small businesses then, because
That's
you
not
just
what
believe
I
big
said. That
businesses
isn't
can
at
do it
all what
better.
I said. I said if you straining to run the family farm.
You're not straining to run the
to a
family farm. You're just without
so
quick
they're
medical
making a good
assistance.
living in this really rural place.
Yes,
Right. Okay. Well,
because
if
they get
that's the
subsidies
case,
from the government.
this is one of the sacrifices of many sacrifices I'm sure that they're going to make to keep this family farm going. Okay, this is what they've decided to do with their life. They need to take some responsibility, accountability, and understand. Hey, this
I tell you
this
what,
decision
don't
has some
die for being
consequences.
stabbed. Take
This-
responsibility
this
and get your ass to
decision
the
they're making
hospital. You can't, don't
has
die
some
before that, though.
consequences. One of those consequences is, hey, maybe I don't got to go to a strip club. Maybe I don't got to go to a casino. Maybe I don't got to go to the fucking hospital when I get
Yes,
stabbed.
because strip clubs and
Maybe
casinos are equal to
this
hospitals.
decision. That's not what I said. You fucking idiot. If they decide to live out there in the fucking wilderness in the family farm, then yeah, they're not gonna have access to shit that's in the big city, of course.
Yeah. No, there's
And it
obviously
makes
there's obviously a trade-off.
It makes
here,
it less desirable.
I-
As it becomes less desirable, less people want to do it, which
Well, I-
means you increase the cost of food prices.
I've always taken
really
the
that
incel
simple.
route and saying that, like, yes, boobs are very.
Like the market, like the
are
price
human right,
equation.
and
The price
so
equation
you
is
should have a strip
undefeated.
club within 15 minutes
Right?
of you. Go ahead, Lacto. You're trying to say something.
Well,
Public good.
It's always a trade-off, right? So like, there's plenty of reasons to move to like a rural area or like a suburban area where like you're a little bit further away from things, right? Like in the Midwest, right? My mortgage is, with everything included, is $400 a month. Not many people in big cities can say that, right? You can get a lot more for a lot less. You also can be away from people if you don't want to, listen to people honk their horns and be around you all day long. And perhaps in a time of COVID, when you're far away from people, it's safer because you don't have, you're automatically socially distancing just simply based on where you live. There's all sorts of let's keep, another thing is there's a lot less regulation on what you can do on your own property, right? My friends that live in rural areas, if you want to go in your backyard and just start open fire on some cans that you have lined up against the fence, you can do that. There's no problem with that. You can't do that in a city, right? There's some major issues there.
And Lacto has a full armory.
So,
I know.
Yeah,
this.
I'm just saying, there is amazing things that come from living in rural areas, but one of the trade-offs here for cheaper living and a more independent lifestyle is a more independent lifestyle, and that you're not going to have access to the same level of services.
Look at price,
that you would if you're living in an urban area.
Look at price though, right? Like the hospital leaves, right? And everyone goes, "Oh my God, what a fucking tragedy." And right. And then all of a sudden the property values in that area go down because they don't have the selling point of emergency care in the immediate area. So now it's cheaper to live there. Well, because it's cheaper to live there, some people are going to be like, fuck this place. I want a hospital nearby. And then some people are going to swoop in and be like, I'm paying $3,000 for a closet in New York City, but it's fucking $600 a month for this place. And so the whole thing here is that as the hospital leaves, right, the property values go down, and then that brings in people that want to live there and are okay with living not near a fucking hospital because the property is so cheap. Like it's a choice.
Except that it's not for everyone.
It's literally a choice for everyone. That's a bullshit lie.
It's not a choice for everyone. Some people, it's difficult. They have all kinds of circumstances to keep them from leaving, right? We already understand this. Like everyone who lives outside of Ancapistan gets that, right? Like that that certain individuals, because there are circumstances, whether because of the financials, right? Maybe it's because
I don't care how poor you are, you can move.
You don't care how poor you are, you can move.
You can move. Yes.
Okay, what's involved in moving?
Scott with the farmers deserve to die take. That's awesome.
Ring up
it does.
U-Haul,
those
$99
farmers
for
deserve
a
to
truck.
die. That's stupid. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. Like, if you want to live near a hospital, then pay.
What's involved in moving?
If you want the right to life, you have to pay for it. Okay.
So you're paying rent somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Presumably, you're not under like an eviction.
I have a question. How many donations to
you're capable
Scott moving to fucking Antarctica? Like, if we can, how many millions of dollars to get sent there?
I mean, for enough money, I'll fucking move to Antarctica. Like, let's go.
Oh, not for you.
But
we'll just ship you there.
But no, like it's such a bullshit take, this idea that people are too poor to move, but they're not so poor that they can't pay their bills and rent.
Sure. Again, tell me what's involved in moving.
Okay, you take your things, you put it in a vehicle, and you drive somewhere.
Oh, you're so sweet.
How much?
Or you carry it.
Oh, Scott.
Scott,
do you think that's it? Do you
if
think
you could,
that's it? Wow, amazing.
What the fuck are you talking about? Like,
right,
yeah, you make some fun. What
no,
are you talking about?
No, yeah, don't worry.
You're
you
not
don't
too
know.
poor.
Don't worry. You don't understand. Don't worry. You don't.
Question.
Hold on, no. We can't move past this yet. Because what Scott doesn't understand, and possibly Lactoid.
I've never moved before.
Shots fired.
I just moved
good
here.
direction. So what
Did
he
mommy and
doesn't
daddy
seem to
pay for it?
understand is that he
They pay
doesn't
for
understand other people's
everything.
situations, right? So yeah, you can just like physically move your stuff. Great.
Guys, have
Check.
you ever been homeless?
Check. Check.
Have you ever
can
been
physically,
homeless?
Excuse me. Excuse me. That's my turn, right? I gave you a chance, right? And you failed miserably. Now it's my turn to correct you. So, you can, you can physically move your stuff, but there might be more to it than that, right? So you have your children, right? Your children who are who have their support system within that area, right? Is that support system going with you, right? If that support system is your parents, is that moving with you as well? Because that's a cost, right? And a cost you may not be able to afford, because we know, and you should know because you have kids, right? That childcare is incredibly expensive. So that's one thing. Then there is, what if you are taking care of someone, right? Taking care of someone who can't take care of themselves, right? Is that person also moving with you? What if it's difficult for them to do
Hire
so?
a
What if
big
you
company
can't
to do
find
is what they're gonna
proper
say.
accommodations
Are they gonna
at the other
die if you
end?
move? Like, what are you talking about?
What like proper accommodations? I mean, like, if they are disabled, do they have? Can you find a place within the big city that accommodates the person that you are taking with you? Right, that's something that happens.
Okay.
There are.
I gotta call and get my cable set up too. Like, obviously, there's a lot involved to fucking moving, but that doesn't mean that it's this giant expense that poor people can't afford. It's silly.
You don't seem
This
to
guy
understand
lives with his
how.
parents, huh?
Have you ever
This-
been homeless?
This guy, sorry, you don't seem to understand that it is very expensive to be poor. That you don't have the
Have you
resources
ever been homeless?
to necessarily. No, I have never been homeless. Right?
I have been. I
have.
know how expensive it is to be poor. Like,
yeah,
stop.
sure. Yeah,
You
but here's
can
the problem.
fucking
And here's the
save-
problem, Scott. Here's always your problem is that you can't bring yourself outside your own perspective. So yes, you might have been homeless, and I believe when you say that, right? You might have had a tough time. I believe you if you say that.
To be
if you're
fair, I had
saying
a
that.
car. I had a car. To be fair,
Okay.
like I slept in a car for like a
okay.
year.
Not truly homeless. Okay.
But the
I
point
made
is
the
that
AMCAP argument.
other
Don't shoot.
people have other situations that are difficult for them that make it near impossible for them to move for all kinds of situations. Like, I'm just like, giving you a few examples. Like, it's not simply moving your stuff from point A to point B, right, and then starting all over.
Get off your
Do you
fucking
have-
ass and move.
Do you have savings, right?
being a
Do you
lazy
have-
fucking
Do you
move.
have savings enough to last you until you get a new job? Well, you could say, well, maybe you should get that new job before you move, right? But do you work in a job? Do you work in a job that gives you the time off, gives you the free time so that you can go to that job? If the city that you're moving to is like 2 hours away, right, or 4 hours away, then maybe you don't have time to go over there, right, and interview at multiple jobs and keep the job that you have now that's putting food on your table. All these things become barriers to moving. This is really simple.
Yeah.
I don't know why this is so
I'm not saying-
complicated.
Also,
I'm not saying it's
would like
super
to get to a
fucking
point where we
easy,
also
but just
ask
get off your fucking ass.
Just get,
I'm
just
not-
do it. Oh, okay.
Let's
Maybe
listen to what he
they weren't
said.
doing
I'm
it,
not
and
saying
they
it's
should
super
do it.
fucking
Oh,
easy.
I
Just
got
get
it.
off your ass. Like, I'm not saying it's
Yes.
easy, but just stand up, okay? Like,
Yes.
So
you don't hear how dumb that sounds.
can I say
No,
two things real quick?
I hear I understand that you guys have like the bleeding heart liberals just want to steal money from people
Not a liberal.
and just like and just fucking and just pour fucking money into
Take offense.
failing
I just
systems
want to hurt
and
you,
destroy
Scott.
the
That's all. I
economy
just
because people
want you
can't
to be
fucking
miserable.
move.
Promise. I don't want to steal
Like,
people's money.
just
I just want you to
move.
cry harder.
Okay, so
What?
two things really quick.
Just cry harder.
So Stabby, I paid for my house entirely on my own. Obviously, I
Good for
paid for a
you.
very cheap house, and I didn't rely on parents' money at all. And I moved here all on my own as well. Now, obviously, I have a job, so some people, I guess, don't have a job. But this kind of, I think, leads into the broader question, and I'm curious. If we boil this down like to its very raw level, Prime, do you think that people have, just simply by virtue of existing, have a right to the product of my labor?
It. mm,
What do
Okay,
you
I'll
think?
say no. I'll just do a simple thing. Say no.
Well, then healthcare is not a right.
No, okay. So, because that framing doesn't work, right? So, like, it's not as if No, because no, the framing specifically for medical care doesn't work. One, you aren't being forced to be a medical physician, right? So you can just not do that, right? You could do something else, right? Apparently,
Gonna come
yeah, sure.
down
I
to
mean,
taxes.
until
So-
until we build a hospital 20 minutes away from everybody, we're gonna have to
sure. Oh my
conscript
God,
people, so-
Scott. Oh my God, he loves being the center of attention. Oh my God, Lactoid. I'm sorry, Lactoid took the spotlight just for a second. Scott couldn't handle it, freaked out, right? And now he's interrupting me because I'm addressing my friend Lactoid, and it says, "Scott, I'll be back to you."
No, I'm
Don't
just
worry.
memeing off you because you're being silly.
Okay. All right. So Lactoid, trying to answer your question. One, you don't have to be a doctor. And two, like, it's not as if you are not going to be paid for that, right? It's not like I'm entitled to the point where you must be forced to work without compensation. You're being compensated as you would be for any other patient, right? But within my system, a Medicare for all, we're more likely or closer to Medicaid for all type of system, then you are simply being paid for your services. I have a right to medical care, not necessarily from you, Lactoid, right? Could be another doctor within that system, but I have a right to medical care.
Wait, so you don't have the right to the fruits of their labor. You have the right to their labor, basically.
Ooh.
Yeah,
But
you
no,
have the
no,
right.
no,
you
you
could
have the right
ask,
to
you could ask the
labor.
same argument about cops. You could ask the same argument about firefighters. You could ask the same argument about the post office. Like we could continue this argumentation till the sun goes up
Lactoid
and
would
down
ask
20
those
million
questions, I'm pretty
times.
sure.
Yeah, so hold
But-
on. So we can get
I
into those
know
questions.
Lactoid.
We can get into those questions if you want. But like the reason, and I think this was kind of like really because Scott's saying, look, if you're in a tough position, like ultimately the responsibility is on you to like see yourself out of it, or to at least make the effort to move and to like try to like put yourself in a different situation. It is true that like in the past, there, different times in American history, there's a lot more movement, right? There was, and other presidential candidates have talked about this, right? Andrew Yang, one of the main points on his presidential campaign was saying we need to encourage Americans to move around the country more because right now that's like dropping down. And in the past, it used to be a lot more. People kind of took this responsibility and said, look, if there's more promise in different areas, that's where we should go, right? We need to get out of the situations that
Let's
we're
give him that level.
in. And so in the most direct way possible, when I ask the question of, do you think simply by existing you have the right to the product of other people's labor? Yeah. So a direct way of saying like interpreting that would be, simply by existing, does a doctor have to treat you? Well, you say no, and I would agree, right? But we say it's not like they're not going to get paid. Well, hold on a minute. The money that they're getting paid from, where did that come from? That's the next question. And so if I take 50% of the product of somebody else's labor to pay that man to treat
There you
you,
go.
Right.
aren't you just adding like a third part? Like you're adding like a little individual third party in between.
Lactoid.
Ah.
You've stumbled on the fundamental issue with statism.
Right.
And
Hey,
here's
Lactoid,
what it
can I-
is that people recognize, right? People recognize once you're honest about it and you realize that you're stealing money, that what it would mean to not steal that money. It
You're
means
right.
that
No
you as an
police,
individual
no
and
firefighters, no post
you as-
office, no
you as an
military.
individual,
Let's do away with that.
we would have all of those
no
things, you
homeland
dumb fuck.
Can you
security.
explain? I
Listen,
have a question.
What,
Can you explain to
no,
me?
let me
Scott,
finish.
I have a
God damn it. No. I will answer your
So,
question in a second. What you have stumbled on is that it requires individual responsibility, and it requires these people to be responsible for the people they care about and their community. It means instead of just saying, yeah, sure, tax me 20% and like the government will magically fix this, which they don't usually, they just fuck it up. Instead of that, they'd actually have to take responsibility for their community. And when they hear about bad things, they have to work collectively and voluntarily to solve those problems. And instead, what they want to do is they want to pat themselves on the back because they stole money and gave it to this apparatus and saying, I'm the good person because I voted for the things.
Okay, let's go to Corey and then Stabby, but we got to move quick because we're already
Yeah, no,
over time.
I'll try to keep it short. So, Lactoid, I want to ask you a question. So, sort of touching upon what you brought up earlier with Prime. So, say you're a physician, okay, and you're whatever driving down the road in your town, and like you come across like a car accident. So does that person who's in a car, do they have the right to your labor?
Of course not.
Okay, so I think that's the fundamental difference. So as in like, Good Samaritan law, like you'd be like against sort of like you're sort of like fine, like you're a physician, you have the tools to help, but like you'd have no
Well,
problem.
so
like,
in the U.S. Good Samaritan law is generally like if you're
Yeah,
trying to help
that's not what
somebody
it
and
is.
you fuck up and they die, you're not
Yeah.
going to be held responsible. In the U.S., there's no obligation that you stop to save somebody's life. That's not a legal obligation in the U.S.
No,
Nor should it
I
be.
no, yeah. So I think that's fundamental difference of like I would say in that case they do have a right to your life saving labor in that case.
But hospitals do have that obligation in the United States.
Yeah.
Right,
But not a
hospital
doctor.
would, but not like an
Exactly.
individual doctor driving down the road. And I think that like when you look at like an individual or like a kind of like a short temporal period like that, it looks a little bit like maybe more favorable. I mean, I still am willing to give an answer right away, but
Wait,
like we can
one
draw it
second.
out and maybe make it a little bit more difficult, right?
One
So
second.
like,
So the doctor driving on the road is off the clock, right? But if
Yeah,
the
yeah,
doctor
yeah.
was on the clock, such as like a traveling like medical facility, like say that for some
I don't know.
godforsaken reason there was a doctor and an EMT, right? That EMT would have the responsibility of stopping and assisting someone who needed
Potentially.
medical assistance.
Potentially an EMT might. I'm not sure. I'm guessing
know.
so, especially if they were on the clock.
Yeah.
But we're talking about like in the kind of the short period of time, like I'm still willing to answer that. But like I think if we draw it out in the long period of time, I think there comes a point in which Corey, even you would agree this is just like we like this is wrong. So one example could be, let's say that I like for some reason can't grow my own food, like, and now I'm in a situation where I need you to grow my food for me. Like, do I have the right for you to be my farmer for the rest of my life?
Yeah. No, you don't want me as your farmer.
Well, obviously not. Because, but you extend it
Let's
out
start there.
further. I mean, it's maybe a little more inconvenience, but the principle is the same. Like, do I not have the right to your labor to sustain myself, just
Right,
simply
yeah.
by virtue of me existing? I mean, it seems kind of really like, again, and this is kind of where I think that maybe modern day socialists to conflict a lot with what Marx argued and conflict a lot of what the earlier conceptions of socialism were, because the modern day leftists are much less concerned about like the principles of owning your own labor, and they're much more concerned with just the principle of equity and just the principle of we got to like give services to people as much as possible, as opposed to like this kind of principle of don't I own myself or do I not own myself? And that's all me and Scott are arguing for. Like,
So-
we should try to maximize the amount we own ourselves.
I got to move along. So Stabby, go ahead.
Self-autonomy, not self-ownership.
Your question?
I'm not
Weird
gonna
problems there.
I'm not going to ask a question so that we don't have to do another one of those fantasy speeches from Scott. So I'm just going to say that you're going to have to convince people like me, which are actually the majority, that taxes aren't the better option for us so that we can actually take care of our community. I somewhat agree with Lactoid that your communities are as strong and as strengthened as the people that are within them. If you'll notice, the libertarian shouldn't have been so, butthurt when I was actually talking about how Colorado solved its own problem using state funds. So I just want to point out that we absolutely are thinking that it is actually cheaper to do this with taxes for the sake of our community. And the vast majority of us believe in that because it's alleviating the burden. So until you can make us think that, farmers deserve to die, or you chose to live in the rural area, food has to come from somewhere, I guess you don't get a hospital. Until you can convince all of us that that's the way to go, when actually the world is going the exact opposite direction, I guess we are going to continue to come at this from a different perspective. Have fun fucking losing. So that's all I have to say.
I mean, again, this is like elementary shit. Like, I don't even need to address like this stupid like fucking warlordism and how dare you and taxes are great arguments.
warlord.
Like, it's just
Warlord.
it's low level.
I was going to say, Stabby,
Hospitals
that
are warfare, guys.
I've derailed this panel enough times going into Ann Capisan shit, and clearly she's way behind.
No,
So like, there's no need for me to take over the panel.
No, you have to actually explain to me why I'm not supposed to be okay with the taxes to help alleviate this.
We can't. No, we can't. We
need a
gotta
whole
move on.
separate panel for that.
We gotta
Stealing's wrong.
move
There
on.
you
We
go.
got to
No, I'm paying it.
move
Nobody stole it from me. Nobody stole it from me.
Hello. Hey, you know what? We gotta move on. You're getting another person
I gave it.
attracted by the siren song of Ann Capistan. It happens all the time.
Dude, I refuse to go down for it. I did it for you.
No, I know.